Order to consider amendment number 14 printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek recognition?
I have a minute to desk, Mr.
Clerk
Chairman.
will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. Young of Alaska.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alaska.
Mr. Speaker, my amendment is simple. It's to make sure Alaska Natives and American Indians populations are able to access traditional foods and nutrition programs. Many American Indians and Alaska Natives incorporate traditional foods, fish, game, seafood, wild berries, and plants into their daily diets. These foods are locally sourced and culturally significant. The cultural significance of traditional foods is especially important in long-term care and hospital settings, where individuals are likely to be away from their homes on extended periods and unable to easily carry on their traditions. It is likewise important for Native youth to have access to traditional foods for proper nutrition and cultural heritage. May I say, Mr. Speaker, that when you're in a hospital, you can recover faster if you have a traditional food. This amendment builds on a previous provision of the mine in the 2014 Farm Bill that authorized the donation and serving of traditional foods which meet the safety standards, and in facilities that serve these indigenous population, it applies to programs encompassing residential child care, child nutrition programs, hospitals and long-term care facilities, and others. There has been no documented safety issues, and the food handling and storage safety standards incorporated in my previous amendment. The standards were in part based on successful standards from Alaska, which has long led the way for safety procedures for traditional foods. For years, this provision has led the way to safety offering traditional foods and the vulnerable populations that need the most. My amendment maintains these standards. This amendment tonight, like the previous one, has no budgetary effects. That's for those that do not want to spend any more money. It simply works to ensure that Native American, Alaska Native youth, and elders can participate in nutritious programs that access traditional foods regardless of the facility in which the program is implemented. This is important given that child nutrition and senior meal programs that serve a significant number of natives are sometimes housed in facilities that aren't specifically designated as tribal. And this legislation is truly focused on the importance of nutrition. This amendment should be heavily accepted and heartily accepted and passed. I strongly urge adoption of this amendment and yield back. It is about nutrition.
Gentleman yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Who claims time in opposition to the amendment?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's with great reluctance that I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. If it were limited just to Alaska, then that might be the one thing, but the underlying language, is too broad. It will allow this happen across the United States, and I have some concerns about food safety with respect to that. I understand what he's trying to get at. I agree with the intent making that, so I reluctantly disagree. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of time. Gentleman from Alaska.
I'd like to at this time yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee of the Committee on Agriculture.
How much time does the gentleman yield? How much time does the gentleman yield?
2 minutes. 1 minute. 30 seconds. No, 1 minute.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
You're taxing me here, Mr. Young. Thank the gentleman for yielding. And I've been to Alaska with Mr. Young a number of times and know the culture up there and what's going on. This is a good amendment. I think it makes a lot of sense for Alaska, and I support it. So I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment.
I thank the gentleman.
Gentleman from Alaska.
Mr. Chairman, I understand why the chairman is against this, but we have no cases where there's been any food hazards, food abuses, or anything like that. And I have to describe one thing to my colleagues. I am 85 years old. I'm an Alaska Native. I've lived in, let's say,